Tonight on Nation and Nation, the Conservative leadership race has barely begun and it's already heating up.
A vote for Pierre Poilievre is a vote for more years of Justin Trudeau.
In the wake of the convoy protests, some observers say the party is drifting further into the political right.
And they're going to be more populist, and I think they're going to be able to capture a lot of people who weren't involved in politics prior to this.
But whether it's presumptive favorite Pierre Poilievre who takes the reins or someone else, they'll need to have a credible reconciliation plan, says policy analyst Melissa Mbarki.
This is something that's going to impact Indigenous people. This is something that's going to impact future generations. And we need somebody who's willing to work with us, not against us.
Plus, in the Inuit homelands, tuberculosis is 300 times more prevalent than elsewhere in Canada. And with COVID-19 draining public health resources, TB rates may actually go up, not down, in the near future.
Like a lot of issues, it's preventable. So it's very frustrating and it's very sad.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Brett Forster. 8 contenders are currently vying to lead the Conservative Party of Canada. Among the front-runners are former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, longtime parliamentarian Pierre Poilievre, and former Ontario Conservative leader Patrick Brown. What should Indigenous people look for as the contest heats up? To discuss that question, I'm joined now by columnist Doug Cuthand. Thanks for being here, Doug.
Thank you.
So what are you watching for as the Tories select a new boss?
It's an interesting race. It's stretched out quite a while. We're not going to find the winner until later on in September. But right now, it appears Pierre Poilievre has got a commanding lead. And I think that has some people concerned because Poilievre has made some statements in the past and was one of the members of the Harper government that really was not very well liked by the leadership of the First Nations or Indigenous peoples all across Canada.
Well, last month, Poilievre published a video following a meeting with Chief Darcy Bear celebrating his community of Whitecap First Nations business achievements. Poilievre said, quote, "This is what is possible when we open our country up for business and opportunity and we allow First Nations to take control of their own destiny. My goal is to give First Nations control of their own lands and their money so that they can pursue incredible opportunities." How do you interpret that as a statement of his policies toward Indigenous people?
A lot about opening things up and giving us our freedom and that kind of stuff. What it really means is that we're heading toward municipalization of our government. We'll be, we won't have the special status for the land, for example. We can't mortgages and loans and encumbrances on the property will be allowed, and that suddenly creates a number of issues. This was tried in the United States, and they lost over half the Indian land as a result of it. So our people are looking for their own solutions, not some other kind of solution imposed on us by some politician in Ottawa who may or may not have our best interests at heart.
Now, you hinted at this a little bit earlier. Do you think the Harper government's policies, of which Poilievre was a member, will hinder his relations with Indigenous people if he becomes leader? You can think back to the cancelling of the Kelowna Accord, opposing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and the Idle No More movement, for example.
Yeah, well, the Idle No More movement was a direct result of the environmental policies that were brought forward by the Harper government. And yes, I think the Harper government left a very bad taste in Indigenous people all across the country here. So Poilievre that's a cross he'll have to bear. He's going to have to carry that with him, and he's going to have to prove that he's independent of that kind of thinking. And I doubt that he can, because he was right in there with Harper. And he's made some statements, like he said that he told, this was to a Ottawa radio station, but he subsequently apologized, but he said that First Nations people need to get a work ethic rather than compensation for residential schools. And that was, that was really hurtful for a lot of people, because we got a lot of hardworking people came out of residential schools and other schools that, didn't deserve that kind of treatment. So what I see in Poilievre is that he's got that he's going to impose what he thinks is best on us.
Well, Pierre Poilievre is not the only candidate in the running. There's a number of contenders out there and very different visions of conservatism on display. How does the party overcome the legacy you're referring to, and do you believe the next leader will want to?
I don't know. That's an interesting question because Aaron O'Toole campaigned on the right and, for the leadership of the Conservative Party, and then he got into an election and he campaigned from the center. So, the rank and file of the Conservative Party, I think, want a turn to the right. That's the way I'm reading this. And they're going to pick someone who's going to be a right-wing leader and stick to the right-wing, dogma throughout the next election. So, I think it's going to give us a clear choice as to who will be the best Prime Minister of Canada, but and what they stand for. So I think that in that sense, it's probably, we'll get some clarification. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. On that note, in one of your columns about the recent convoy protest, you write that it had been hijacked by the far right before it came to Ottawa. We also saw Aaron O'Toole, who lost his job amid the convoy protest. His party mutinied against him. So do you see this affecting the political ideology of the Conservative Party?
I think it has a definite effect on it. I think the Conservative Party is moving into a populist area, and they want to be, they're capturing the zeitgeist of the populism that came out of that kind of thing, where they were calling for, just the, for example, the term freedom, just kicked around all over the place these days. It really means greed and, for your own self. And your selfishness, but that's what they're going to run on stuff like that, and I think that's the Conservative Party is making a move to the right, and they're going to be more populist, and I think they're going to be able to capture a lot of people who weren't involved in politics prior to this. Like a lot of the people in the convoy hadn't voted Conservative or Liberal or anything. They hadn't participated in Canadian politics, and now, if the Conservatives can get into this populist area, they will gain those, but on the other hand, they may lose some. So I think it's an evolution of Canadian politics.
Do you think that'll be enough for them to win control of the federal government? And do you think nowadays the party that wins government needs a viable plan for reconciliation? First
of all, we do need a viable plan for reconciliation. This is this whole area has been played around with, and in some cases neglected by different political parties, and in some cases embraced. But really, we need to move forward. And I'm not that keen on the term, itself, because it implies that we somehow had a breakup and we're getting back together again. Well, we're not. Reconciliation, we were always separate, and we're now, becoming more involved in Canadian politics, the Canadian economy, and the Canadian social structure. That's what reconciliation should be really all about, is getting us, raising our standard of living and moving us ahead. That's more important than a lot of the trappings that both the Liberals, the NDP, and all the parties are dealing with now.
Okay, Doug Cuthand, thanks a lot for sharing your insight on this subject.
You're very welcome.
And we'll have much more on the Tory leadership race after a short break. Welcome back. We are focusing on the Conservative leadership battle. Party members are set to elect a new boss this summer, and with Trudeau in power until 2025 following a deal with the NDP, the next Tory leader will have ample time to establish their vision for the country. Melissa Mbarki is a policy analyst with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. She joins me to offer her take. Welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thanks for inviting me to the show.
Melissa, how important is this race for the future of the Conservative Party?
I think it's very crucial who's going to be voted in, because Indigenous issues for the last few years have been really, really tough topics. And if they can't address our issues or are unwilling to talk about them, we need to have a leader that's willing to work with us and move forward with us with reconciliation and with projects that we have going on reserves.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, what are some things Indigenous people who are interested in this contest should look for as they watch it unfold?
I think we should really look for members who are willing to talk about the economy and Indigenous prosperity. I think we should look for, people who want reporting and proper accountability when it comes to on and off reserve funding. I think we should look at people who are willing to, kind of push the envelope a little bit and look at things like healthcare on reserves or healthcare facilities. These are much needed, and these are some of the issues that were brought up during the pandemic, and we definitely need a leader that's going to be able to address these.
You hinted at this a little bit earlier. Do you think the Tories need to have a viable reconciliation plan if they want to eventually run the country?
They definitely do. I mean, this is something that's going to impact Canadians. This is something that's going to impact Indigenous people. This is something that's going to impact future generations. And we need somebody who's willing to work with us, not against us. And if we can get party members to start having these discussions, it would make the whole reconciliation process a little bit easier.
Now, this race has really only begun, and we've already seen some bitterness between the candidates and personal attacks. Why do you think it's proving divisive already?
They're not talking about their policies, number one. They're not addressing the things that they want to for Canadians. So it's really hard to decipher who's going to be in your corner or not when they're attacking each other. They just need to focus on what they can do and what they can do for Canadians and Indigenous people.
Can you talk a little bit about the different ideological elements of the party that seem to be struggling here? What are your thoughts on that?
From some of the party members, actually the majority of them, they haven't brought up Indigenous issues at all. So it's very hard to know what their stance is prior to voting. There's only one person out there who really is engaging the Indigenous communities, and that's Pierre. I haven't seen a whole lot of activity from the other ones, and all they seem to be doing is just looking at each other and attacking each other. I definitely think they need to just ground themselves again and just really focus on the policies that they can bring to this party.
Some First Nations thinkers and leaders have expressed a little bit of concern about what a potential shift to the right or toward populism could mean. What do you make of those concerns?
I don't think it really has anything to do with populism. I think what we need to focus on as Indigenous leaders and Indigenous groups is what can this party bring to Indigenous communities what kind of economic benefits can they bring? If they can't, support things like healthcare, health facilities, child and family, social services type programs, if they can't get on board with those, then, they're going to be not the party for Indigenous people. And we just really need to get them working with us and listening to us. I think that is the first step. Well,
I suppose the follow-up question there would be how? How do we get to that point? The Conservative Party has been responsible for some advances in Indigenous rights in the past. It was Diefenbaker who extended the right to vote to Indigenous people. Brian Mulroney was going to incorporate self-government into the Constitution before those talks fell apart. So how does that happen going forward?
I think what we really need to do is we need to put racism and what a racist policy is aside, because this is the one thing that's dividing Canada. The second that somebody comes up with a policy and somebody behind says, no, this is a racist policy, when in fact it's not. If you look at conservatism in terms of, economic prosperity and just listen to what they can potentially bring to your community, I mean, they can get us 10 steps ahead versus 10 steps back. And, we've seen them progress throughout the years. We've seen an apology from Harper, so there are steps, but we just need to make that process a little bit faster, and they need to be engaged with us and really listen to us in terms of what we want and what we need.
Well, the last Conservative government of Stephen Harper also took some hard stances against Indigenous people. We talked about that a little bit earlier, cancelling the Kelowna Accord, for example, and opposing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So how does the new leader overcome that legacy?
I think what needs to be addressed is what are the issues that they've had with it? Because even when you look at UNDRIP today and Bill C-15, it doesn't address entirely our issues. If anything, it made things a little bit more vague for us. You know, it doesn't define who's Indigenous. It doesn't define which lands. You know, so there are shortfalls even with the current government. And I think when we look at those policies and we really take them apart, we can really see where improvements can be made. And I think this is where that divisiveness needs to be addressed. You know, Indigenous issues should be a nonpartisan issue to begin with, because we can pull on all the parties and bring different, viewpoints into our self-governance, and each party can help us in a different way. So it's not a matter of who's racist or who's not. We just need to look at what can this party offer us.
How much support among Indigenous people for the Conservative Party would you say there is, and what do you think drives it?
The communities that I'm going to say closer to urban areas are a little bit more supportive of conservative policies. Communities that are a little bit more rural and northern, they tend not to see, the overall happenings politically. Like, they tend to be a little bit more isolated. So I find these communities are a little bit, less supportive. But I definitely think if we get some messaging out there of what these different parties can offer us, I think we can definitely see a shift in how people view these parties. And I definitely think we can get more questions out there on how they can help us.
All right, Melissa, it was great to talk to you on this, but we have to leave it there.
Thanks. Well, I'm really glad to be here today.
Well, we were glad to have you. And we have to take another break. Stick around for more on Nation to Nation. Welcome back. For many years, it was known as the White Plague. We know it as tuberculosis. The potentially serious infectious disease has been nearly eliminated in Canada, but among Inuit living in the traditional Inuit homelands, the infection rate remains more than 300 times higher than in the non-Indigenous population. The situation was highlighted last month when the Nunavut community of Pangnirtung was hit with overlapping outbreaks of TB and COVID-19. Jessie Mike is the Director of Social and Cultural Development with Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated. She joins me now. Welcome to Nation.
Thank you, Brett.
On a personal level, what goes through your mind when you see a TB outbreak occur?
I think, like a lot of issues, it's preventable. So it's very frustrating, and it's very sad that we still live in a time when we have this disease in our communities.
Given, as you say, that this is preventable, why are infection rates disproportionately higher in some northern regions?
For a few reasons. The biggest reason we know is due to overcrowding. There's a large shortage of housing here in Nunavut, and so a lot of homes are lived in by multi-families and generations, and that's one of the biggest factors. Food insecurity is another one.
So let's talk about elimination. The federal government has committed to eliminating TB in the Inuit territories by 2030. How successful have elimination efforts been so far?
Well, I think we know that the pandemic has played a role in kind of putting a lot of health issues to the side and has become a priority. But we've also learned that through the pandemic, there's other ways that we can prevent spread of TB in the same way that we prevent the spread of COVID. And to date, we haven't reached the goals that we anticipated. But what we do know is that because of COVID and and the programs, the TV programs kind of getting put to the side, there is a potential that there'll be increased rates of TB in the next few years.
Well, the pandemic also showed us that governments can marshal swift and substantial responses to public health crises when they want to. Why do you think that same urgency hasn't been applied to addressing TB in the past?
I think it's based a lot on the demographics of who's impacted by TB and who was impacted by COVID. I think that, you know, there's been a lot more very quick response to funding and support programs, food security through the pandemic, and I think that that's something that we should continue to do to allow our communities to be healthy and have access to food, and we are happy to hear that there was a large amount of money committed to by the Liberal government for housing in Inuit regions, and that will directly help us with our efforts to eliminate TB in Nunavut.
And finally, if COVID-19 is here to stay permanently, if it becomes a seasonal endemic illness, how could that complicate the fight against TB?
Well, I'm not too sure about how that would complicate it, but I think there's an opportunity to work with both. You know, we can create screening clinics, and now we all know that these diseases are spread in mass health, and social distancing and cleaning and things like that. Those help. So I feel like the information that we have now with COVID and the amount of information that was constantly being shared, it can be similar to the TB information that were provided. So in terms of prevention and our individual efforts to not spread it, and I think that there's an opportunity for us to work to create make more priority to continue to screen people for TB, and as in the same way that we have seen COVID be treated for, with statistics, and that allowed us to know what measures to take within our communities. Those types of things would be, I think, helpful. But like I said, because the amount of effort that was put towards COVID, we know all over the world other health issues took the back burner, unfortunately. So it's hard to tell now where things are at.
Okay, I really want to thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Brett.
And that's it for tonight's episode of Nation to Nation. You can find this one and past shows online or on our podcasts. Go to aptnnews.ca/Nation to Nation. I'm Brett Forster, and I'll see you next week.